Imagine, if you will, a world where the pages of history remain unturned, where the quiet whispers of the past echo only in the rustle of leaves. Tonight we embark on a journey not to the grand halls of nobility, but to the humble, unrecorded edges of time, where the true essence of survival is etched not in stone, but in the hearts of those forgotten by the annals of fame. Let us delve into the lives of medieval peasants, those unsung heroes who knew no thrones, no tapestries, yet bore the weight of existence with a resilience that stirs the soul. These were the people who faced plagues that darkened the skies, hunger that gnawed at their insides, and cold that seeped into their bones. They endured not with pomp or parade, but with a silent, steadfast strength that most of us could scarcely fathom. If the thought of this slow, serene history soothes your spirit, let yourself be enveloped by its tranquility. As you settle in, perhaps with the gentle hum of a fan or the dimming of lights, let your mind wander to a village so obscure it might well be invisible. Nestled in a gentle dip of the land, this village is a mere whisper on the breath of the earth, far from the prying eyes of history maps or monarchs. Here, where the world seems to end at the forest's edge, life unfolds in simple, profound ways. The forest, thick and ancient, moves with a lethargy that speaks of times long past, tolerating human presence as if it were a mere inconvenience. Beyond, the fields sprawl in uneven patches, tilled until the earth itself cries for rest, yet yielding to the relentless hands that coax life from its depths. To the north lies a river unseen but spoken of in hushed, reverent tones, like a myth or a distant legend. Here, in this unnamed, unremembered place, the fabric of life is woven from toil and tenacity. What stories do these fields hold? What secrets whisper through the trees? Let us begin at the very edge of the known world, where every day is a testament to endurance, and every night a quiet celebration of survival. Here, in this humble village where life unfolds in a mere 60 steps from cradle to grave, the homes stand as weathered sentinels against the relentless onslaught of time. Their structures, woven from mud, straw, and sticks, are a testament to resilience, each patch a story of survival against the elements. The roofs, heavy with thatched bough under their own weight, leaking in spots that remain just out of reach, as if mocking the villagers' efforts to keep them intact. The air here is thick with the scent of wet wool, the lingering smoke from hearths, and the earthy musk of the soil itself. There's a sour note from livestock and a faint whiff of decay, yet these odors are as much a part of home as the people themselves. You've grown so accustomed to this bouquet of life that it no longer surprises or offends. The path that winds into the village, scarcely more than a rutted track, has been deepened by the passage of ox carts now filled with stagnant water, a breeding ground for mosquitoes. It's been years, perhaps forever, since anyone of note has ventured along this route. Days here are marked not by bustling activity, but by the quiet passage of time, signaled perhaps by a distant bell from another village, carried on the wind, or more often by the sun's slow arc across the sky, or the deepening shadows that stretch across the fields, or the persistent ache in one's back that comes before noon. In this small community where a dozen families can fill a gathering on feast days, familiarity breeds both comfort and a silent agreement to overlook each other's troubles until they can't be ignored any longer. The village elder Tom, a man whose claim to wisdom rests on a single conversation with a monk, is as much a part of the landscape as the homes themselves. His hut stands, his goat thrives. That's leadership enough for these folk. Here, precision is a luxury. There are no written records, no deeds, no land surveys. Boundaries are known not by maps, but by mutual understanding, by the shared knowledge of where one's garden ends and another's begins. What need have they for precision when life itself is a daily negotiation with the elements? Here, where the ground softens beneath the gnarled limbs of the old elm, life unfolds in a rhythm as predictable as the seasons. Disputes, when they arise, are met with a casual shrug, a brief exchange of words, and perhaps a loaf of bread, exchanged back and forth until the will to argue fades into the evening mist. There is no school, no tavern, no inn to harbor travelers or tales of the outside world. When a stranger does appear, their arrival is a spectacle discussed for weeks. Where have they journeyed from? What desires drive them? Are they cursed, or do they carry the scent of distant seas? The fascination is as palpable as the mild terror that accompanies the unknown. And leaving, that's less of a plan and more of a whispered rumor. Stories circulate of towns of cities where buildings of stone tower, 2 or even 3 stories high tales as mythical as talking animals, or women transforming into birds. But you can't yearn for a world you've never laid eyes upon. The forest here is dense. The hills stretch endlessly, and the roads, if they can be called, that are notorious for their bandits and the bad luck they bring, rather than any promise of reaching a destination. What would you do even if you could reach those fabled places? You speak no other tongue, carry no coin, know none of their customs. You might not even know your own age, so you remain. There's a peculiar safety in the familiar. Despite the hardships, the monotony, the leaking roof, the well running low, the stew that's been simmering for days. There's solace in routine and knowing where to find the firewood, whom to turn to when your fence falls, which patch of sky signals it's time to bring in the sheep. You rise with the dawn, you rest as dusk descends, and in between you work. It might not be much, but it's life, simple, steady, and somehow in the quiet rhythm of this existence, there's a profound beauty. In this tranquil corner of existence, peace reigns supreme. It's a peace that doesn't interrogate, doesn't pry into the mysteries beyond the nearest hill. Occasionally whispers of a distant war, the death of a king, or a comet that terrified a village 5 days' walk away might reach your ears. Yet these tidings never make it to your doorstep. They're diluted through countless retellings, losing their edge somewhere between the bustling merchant and the shepherd's distant cousin. Here time itself dances to a different tune, seasons merging without clear demarcation. Spring, damp and persistent, melts into a summer equally sodden. Winter arrives not with a gentle touch, but with a ferocity that gnaws at your very boots. You don't measure time in years, but in harvests. Each one unique, memorable. The dry, the wet, the year the rye turned black with rot, or the bountiful season when barley thrived, and even old Marjorie, with his perpetually furrowed brow, found reason to smile for a week. His steward, ever the meticulous one, collects the grain, poses questions, and scribbles notes. Your responses are cautious, sparing in detail, for detail seems to unsettle him. The king, a figure as distant as the stars, remains a name you utter in prayers more out of habit than understanding. Here at the very edge of the known world, change is rare and seldom for the better. Yet life persists in its simple beauty. The hearth glows the roof, those sagging holds, and the cottage remains a bastion of warmth. Tomorrow the sun will rise over the same hills, and that for now suffices. Throughout your life you'll tread many a mile, yet these paths will circle back, never straying far from the familiar. Most in the medieval countryside never venture beyond a stone's throw from their birthplace, their world encapsulated in the gentle rise and fall of the land they know so well. You were born into a world where the horizon was your limit, not because you lacked the spirit of adventure or the boots to tread upon the earth, though boots were often a scarce luxury, but because the world beyond the next hill simply did not belong to you. The very notion of exploring it seemed as fantastical as taking flight. You grew up memorizing the names of every parcel of land from your doorstep to the farthest field. Each tree stump along the path to the well was as familiar to you as a friend's face. By the depth of footprints in the mud, you could discern who had passed before you. Everything beyond this intimate acquaintance with your surroundings began to feel like a mere theory, an abstraction. The next village, a mere 5 miles distant, might as well have been an alien planet. Oh, the stories you heard, who married whom, who was accused of stealing a goat, the scandalous whispers about the priest snoring through mass. Yet these tales remained just that, stories. Travel was not an adventure of the exhilarating kind. It was fraught with peril, a silent, exhausting, and potentially deadly endeavor. The roads were not the well-trodden paths you might imagine, lined with signs and bustling with fellow travelers. Instead, they were muddy tracks snaking through forests, fields, and vast expanses of eerily silent emptiness. No maps to guide you, only vague directives like, keep going until you see the leaning pine tree, then turn left at the stone that looks like a sleeping pig. And on these paths, dangers lurked. First, the forest itself was no gentle park, no romantic retreat. It was a dense, dark, knotted maze of roots echoing with sounds you couldn't always place. Bears, wolves, and those who preferred their solitude over company. If you weren't born to the woods, they had no welcome for you. Then there were the bandits, those with nothing left to lose, no land to till, no future to dream of. Travelers were easy targets, particularly if they appeared even slightly prosperous. The paths were not just tracks through nature. They were gauntlets to be run where every step could be your last. In this world, the well-fed were but a fleeting sight, a man's purposeful stride, hinting at a coin-filled purse, a woman journeying alone, perhaps guarding a treasure worth taking. Yet confidence offered no shield against the harsh realities of life. To get lost was no mere trifling matter. There was no knight in shining armor to rescue you, no river to guide you to safety. Days could pass without a glimpse of another soul, your body dissolving into the wilderness like mist. How long before someone noticed your absence? Not until the next feast day, perhaps when a shrug would be the only answer to inquiries of your whereabouts. Then there were the practicalities, the nagging questions that tethered you to your homestead. Who would till your field if you ventured too far? Who would tend to the livestock, ensure their sustenance? And what of the Lord's steward, his ledger in hand, demanding his due while you were away? Your responsibilities did not take a holiday simply because your curiosity yearned for the unknown beyond the horizon. And if you did reach another village, what then? You were not anticipated, not welcomed with open arms. Strangers brought trouble, disease, crime, alien thoughts. Your dialect might differ, your phrases foreign. Even the way you held your spoon could mark you as an outsider. Hospitality was a rare commodity food, even scarcer and every bed claimed. Home was safest not for its inherent security, but for its familiarity. You knew the leaky spots on the roof, the adventurous chickens, the neighbor who might lend a tool without prying too deeply. Out there, you were owed nothing. Yet some did travel. Not the common folk, mind you, but merchants with their wares, monks on pilgrimage, messengers with urgent tidings, those with purpose or protection or both. These you might see once, perhaps twice a year, their presence a reminder of the world beyond your own. From the dusty paths came the travelers, their carts brimming with wool or barrels of salted fish, and with each step they unfurled tales like ribbons of smoke from a distant campfire. They whispered of cities where structures rose from stone, where markets overflowed with spices, and where cobblestones did not dissolve into mud with every rain. Such tales seemed as mythical as the stars. Could these places truly exist? You listened, your heart swelling with curiosity, yet you dared not dream too vividly. For even if these stories held truth, what could you, an unlettered soul with no coins to jingle, do in such a grand world? The customs, the complexities, would they not engulf you like a wave, leaving no trace of your existence? So you remained not from fear, although fear sometimes whispered in your ear, but from duty. There were fences to repair a niece, to nurture barley to dry, and countless chores that beckoned before the sun kissed the treetops goodnight. And in truth, did the world need to expand beyond the familiar? The village was enough with its tapestry of gossip, its storms of conflict, the dance of weather, the shadow of illness, and the brief sparkling joys. Life here had its rhythm marked by the toll of bells and the cycle of seasons, and in that rhythm there was a quiet pride in enduring another day. Yes, there were moments when your thoughts strayed to the mysteries beyond the forest's edge, but on most days your mind was anchored to the simple hope that the stew simmering on the hearth would not char while you drew water from the well. The village was enough with its whispers of tales, its trials, its weather, its illnesses, and its fleeting joys. It was life in its most tangible form. Some did leave, those driven by desperation or recklessness or perhaps ambition. A young man might set out with a heart full of dreams, seeking, in search of work or adventure or perhaps a cause worthy of ultimate sacrifice. He set forth only to return with a limp, a tale, or perhaps not at all. When he vanished, the village merely nodded, murmuring, "He went beyond the trees," as if those words alone encapsulated the entirety of his fate. For those who remained, life was modest but familiar. Loneliness. No, not exactly. Your days were woven with the fabric of family neighbors, the gentle creatures in the very earth beneath your feet. There was solace in the routine, in the well-worn grooves of daily complaints. Did you need to witness the grandeur of a distant city, to appreciate warmth or taste the exotic spice of cinnamon, to savor the sweetness of bread? Did you need to journey across a kingdom to embrace love, to feel the sting of sorrow, the drag of boredom, or the flutter of hope? As the years crept by, the pain settled deeper into your bones and the children stretched taller than the weathered fence posts. The notion of travel dimmed not with regret, but with a gentle acceptance. Some souls are destined for wandering, yours for staying put. There is no grand design here, no master plan, no neatly stacked lumber awaiting construction, just earth and timber and whatever else the land has not yet reclaimed. Your home is not merely a structure, it transcends the typical notion of a house. It's a delicate balance between refuge and the elements, between effort and inevitable decay, between necessity and the grudging gifts of the landscape. You start with the frame using rough-hewn timbers from the closest trees, cut by tools that have known many hands before yours. The wood isn't straight, it bends, it warps, but does that matter? Your walls do the same. Once the skeleton stands, you weave in thin branches or pliable sticks, creating a tapestry of shelter, a testament to resilience. In the tapestry of life, the process known as Unwind emerges a humble, unassuming method, not quick nor graceful, yet it holds firm, mirroring the resilience of your own existence. Here comes the daub, a concoction of earth, straw, dung, and water. With your hands you apply it, press it into the crevices, smoothing just enough to keep out the chill of the wind, convincing yourself of its purpose. As it dries under the sun, it cracks and bits crumble away, demanding repair before the cold of winter sets in. You grow accustomed to its odor until it fades into the background unnoticed. Above the roof wears its thatch like a crown of dried straw, meticulously layered and bound to the beams. Fresh it glows with a golden hue almost enchanting. But then the rains descend, the birds arrive, and time itself takes its toll. The vibrancy fades, edges unravel, and unexpected holes appear, necessitating buckets placed in spots you wished you'd never have to acknowledge. You don't think of shingles or waterproofing. You simply patch until the roof resembles more patch than roof. At times the thought crosses your mind, might it be simpler to shelter under a cart? The floor, a canvas of packed earth, tells a story of its own. Years of footsteps, the sweep of a broom spills, and the heavy tread of life have compacted it into a semblance of solidity. Yet with rain it turns soft, with frost it splits, and when the goats seek refuge for the night, what lies beneath becomes a mystery. You might scatter rushes or straw to mask it, offering temporary relief. But soon this too succumbs to dampness, dirt, and the inexorable march of feet turning to dust. You sweep it away, or perhaps you don't, allowing the straw to become the floor, an accepted part of your world. Windows, technically. Despite the walls standing as steadfast guardians, there are always those peculiar openings, awkwardly sealed with wooden shutters that dance in the wind, never quite embracing the wall in a seamless hug. Glass, oh, the luxury of glass is a dream, too costly, too delicate, too distant for these modest abodes. Instead, the elements enter uninvited. The wind whispers secrets, the chill sneaks in, and the cacophony of the outside world, from the rustling leaves to the clucking of chickens, fills the room. Even the creatures themselves might occasionally venture inside. The single door, often askew from the last winter's harsh embrace, is more of a suggestion than a barrier, secured not for safety, but to corral the livestock and contain the wayward breezes. It latches with a simple hook or a wooden peg, a humble attempt at maintaining some semblance of order in the shared sanctuary. Within, the space unfolds in a communal embrace. Typically, there's just one room, though some might boast an additional lean-to, or loft where life's most intimate moments unfold. Sleeping, eating, cooking, mending, conversing, quarreling, and dreaming. Here under one roof reside parents, children perhaps, a couple of cousins, a grandparent, and occasionally a neighbor's child left in the care of the community when parents are no more or too ill to provide. At the heart, a hearthstone, if fortune smiled clay, if it did not cast a warm, smoky glow. The smoke, in a somewhat whimsical escape, finds its way through a hole in the roof, leaving behind an air that's always slightly hazy, tenderly warm, and tinged with the persistent aroma of a stew, simmering perhaps a bit too long. Furniture, sparse and utilitarian, includes a table, a bench, maybe a stool, and if luck or love were kind, a chest. Beds, simple wooden frames, are stuffed with straw, or feathers often share their creaks, a symphony of the night. Blankets woven from wool offer a rough, heavy warmth, never quite free from the damp. Above the rafters serve as storage, cradling garlic, onions, herbs, and perhaps, if the pig was generous, a small ham. The very air as it ascends whispers tales of the seasons, from the crisp of early winter to the budding hope of late spring, carrying with it the essence of a life lived close to the earth, where every breath tells a story. In the embrace of this humble abode, there's an oddly comforting sense of closeness, an intimate reminder of how fleeting time can be. Animals, integral members of the family, share the living quarters. Imagine a cow slumbering peacefully in a corner of your room, or chickens pecking about, and perhaps a goat bleating softly as it finds its spot. It might not be the epitome of cleanliness, yet there's a warmth to it, a rustic charm that you learn to cherish. The sounds of their clucks, shuffles, and the occasional startled bleat become the lullaby of your nights, blending seamlessly with the rustling wind through the thatch, or the slow, almost breathing creak of the walls. Nothing in this house stands perfectly straight. The floor dips gently, the roof slopes precariously, and the walls with their slight bulge seem to expand and contract with each passing season. You mend what you can, and what you can't, you simply learn to overlook. Each spring you vow to fix that leaning back wall, but come autumn it's still there, slightly askew. This isn't a home constructed for eternity, it's one built to weather the next storm. Yet despite its myriad imperfections, this is your sanctuary. You've mastered the art of survival here. You know exactly where the drafts sneak in and how to seal them with an old sack. You're familiar with the exact roof beam strong enough to hang a pot and which one groans ominously under too much weight. You understand the way the light dances through the slats in the afternoon, painting patterns on the floor, and you know the perfect spot where the dog loves to curl up and sleep. To the outsider, this might appear as poverty, but to you it's a testament to effort, to reuse, to resourcefulness. A roof still standing is a triumph. A fire that smolders at dawn is a blessing in a dry corner. That's more precious than gold. As you lay down at day's end, enveloped by the symphony of snores, the whisper of silence, the lingering scent of smoke, and the soft rustle of straw, you feel not pride, but a profound sense of presence. This is your space. It bends, it leaks, it shifts, yet it is undeniably yours. Imagine the gentle whisper of the wind, carrying with it the scent of the fields and the promise of another day. Yet amidst this serene backdrop, life for the average medieval peasant was anything but tranquil. Food was not a celebration, a palette of flavors to savor. Instead, it was a relentless puzzle pieced together daily with the same worn-out ingredients, the same fervent hope that something, anything, would be palatable. Your kitchen, if one could grace it with such a title, was merely a corner of your one-room dwelling, huddled by the hearth. No pantry filled with an array of spices, no shelves boasting jars of preserved goods, nor herbs drying in the sunlight. Here there was just a pot, a fire, and a modest collection of items you prayed were still good. At the heart of nearly every meal was pottage, an enduring concoction that never really began or ended. This eternal stew living in the pot was always simmering, always evolving. You added what you could during the day, skimmed what you dared at night, and kept it warm through the changing seasons, all the while hoping against hope that no unwelcome mold would make its home there when you weren't looking. The ingredients, they were as humble as the life they sustained. On the best of days, your pottage might boast a bit of cabbage, some leeks perhaps, barley, and a handful of legumes. Garlic or onions might grace the pot if the harvest had been particularly generous. In the lean winter months, dried beans or peas became your staples. And if fortune truly smiled upon you, a sliver of salted pork might find its way into the mix. More often, however, it was merely the bone. Even that was treasure. You could boil it for days, coaxing out flavors, hoping it might recall the taste of meat. The taste of pottage was not about delight, but survival. It was earthy, somewhat gray, more a warmth in your belly than a dance on your tongue. You didn't partake in pottage for the pleasure of it. You ate it because it was there, because it was what you had. A warm meal at the close of a long, hard day. Ah, the day was not just a comforting respite. It was a small victory, a triumph against the relentless march of time and toil. The pot, that humble vessel of sustenance, bore the scars of countless meals. Never truly clean, it was merely wiped down, occasionally scraped, but seldom scrubbed. Each new batch of stew would absorb the lingering essence of the last, a ghostly flavor that no spice could mask, no vinegar could brighten. Instead, it carried the taste of boiled history, a slow and reliable dullness that spoke of endurance. And then there was the bread. Oh, the bread. Not the soft, golden, inviting kind that graces the tables of the affluent, but rather a dense, dark loaf as hard as the times that shaped it. Crafted mostly from rye barley or oats for wheat, the soft white kind was a luxury far beyond the reach of the common folk. These loaves, small and heavy, did not rise to lofty heights. They crumbled like the hopes of those who baked them. Left out for a day, they could serve as a makeshift weapon, but they were sustenance filling the stomach and soaking up the meager stew. Sometimes the bread was made from whatever remnants were at hand, questionable flour chaff, ground peas, or the very dregs from the miller's barrel. In dire times, people turned to the bark of trees not in jest, but in desperation, grinding the inner layer and mixing it with scant flour to create what was known as famine bread. Bitter, dense, and hardly digestible, yet it was this that kept one's life flickering in the face of starvation. And when flour itself became a rarity, people resorted to trenchers, slices of old bread used as plates. These would soak up the stew, either consumed at meal's end or tossed to the animals, or sometimes in a nod to the harsh pecking order of society passed down the table to someone of lesser status. This was bread hierarchy at its starkest. Protein, oh so rare. Chickens laid eggs, cows gave milk, and livestock was not eaten unless dire need dictated. When such a choice was made, every part was utilized meat, fat, organs. In the heart of those times, bones were treasured not for their strength, but for the sustenance they could provide. Blood, once a mere part of life, was transformed into puddings, a testament to the ingenuity of necessity. Fat rendered from the animals became a precious resource, and even the head, often overlooked, found its destiny in a pot of soup. Nothing went to waste in this world where pork reigned supreme when it graced the table. Pigs, the efficient providers, gifted their salted fat, turning the unpalatable into something that could be savored if only barely. But oh, the planning required for a pig's slaughter. Weeks of meticulous preparation, from salting to storing, each step a ritual of survival. For those near the water, fishing offered respite, yet it was not without its chains. Lords controlled many rivers and lakes, and to cast a net without their blessing was to risk fines or worse. To catch eels, small river fish, or anything that wouldn't spoil too quickly. Salted herring, a true treasure, if one could procure it, was a feast in itself. The church, too, played its part in dictating meals. Fridays and Lent times of reflection meant no meat-pushing diets towards fish, or the occasional curious classification of beaver tails as fish, a theological workaround that few dared question, grateful for any sustenance. Milk, while common, was as fragile as a newborn's breath, requiring swift transformation into cheese or butter. Butter, a luxury in some households, was doled out with a miser's hand. Cheese, harder and tangier, was a sign of a cow's generosity, stored like precious jewels. Dairy was a double-edged sword. It nourished but often disagreed with the stomach, and without refrigeration, spoilage was a constant companion. Sour milk, rancid butter, moldy cheese. These were the challenges met with resilience, cutting around the spoilage and hoping for the best. Drinks were simple, yet fraught with danger. Water, often as unreliable as a gambler's promise, could be a risk to health depending on the season and the carelessness of upstream neighbors. Thus, ale became the staple, the weak ale known as small beer, the safer choice in a world where every sip could be a gamble. Ah, the humble small beer, a beverage that graced the tables of medieval households. Brewed within the cozy confines of homes, this mild concoction quenched the thirst of all, from the youngest child to the eldest grandparent. Its alcohol content was just potent enough to banish harmful bacteria and to take the edge off one's parched throat. Imagine the joy when apples or pears were at hand, for then the merry cider might flow. Wine, however, was a luxury reserved for the robes of the clergy and the courts of the nobility. Mead, that divine nectar of honey and water, was a rare treat indeed. Milk was a tender offering, mostly for the young or the infirm, but for everyone else, ale was the companion at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, a liquid solace to help one forget that the morrow would bring the same flavors as today. The backbone of the medieval diet was the sturdy vegetable. Cabbage, onions, garlic, turnips, and leeks stood tall, while carrots, not the vibrant orange we cherish today, but white or purple, were carefully cultivated. Gardens were small but precious, where every plant was nurtured from root to leaf. Waste was anathema. The tops of turnips could be boiled into greens, their skins either composted or cast into the fire. Fruit, oh, the fleeting delight of fruit apples were the common treasure, with perhaps some berries or wild plums making a brief appearance. If you had the foresight to dry them, they might grace your winter table. Otherwise, they were devoured with haste, for preserving them was a daunting task. Sugar was a dream out of reach, but if you were blessed with bees, honey became your precious sweetener. Yet for most, the pottage remained a savory affair. Herbs were more than mere flavor. They were the guardians of health and tradition. Parsley, sage, dill, mint, not just for taste, but for protection against illness, to ward off pests, or sometimes by chance to enhance the flavor of a dish. But that was a serendipitous occurrence, not the intent. Meals were a communal affair, shared on benches encircling the warmth of the hearth. There were no elaborate courses, no recipes to follow, just a pot simmering, a piece of bread to tear, and the silent prayer that there would be enough for another day. Complaining was futile. It wouldn't thicken the stew. But oh, when life offered a feast, a wedding, a harvest festival, or a saint's day, then perhaps the ordinary became extraordinary. Ah, to roast a bird or bake a pie. Yet let's not conjure images of the flaky, buttery kind that dance on our modern tables. No, in medieval times, a pie was a sealed fortress of hard dough, a culinary vault for a hearty meat filling. If fortune smiled, spices like pepper, ginger, or cinnamon might grace its depths, transforming it into a rare treasure. But most often, the days were not feast days. They were quiet, the rhythm of life, as predictable as the turning of the seasons. Imagine scraping your bowl, soaking your bread, sipping your ale, and leaning back content enough to face the evening, even if not quite satisfied. There was a peculiar comfort in this repetition. The taste of the pot was a familiar song. The amount of bread left a known quantity, and the same hands that prepared the meal by the same flickering fire were a constant in an ever-changing world. As the wind whispered secrets through the cracks in the walls, and the animals rustled in their slumber, the stew bubbled, the bread cooled, and you once again had enough. As a medieval peasant, your possessions were few. A small plot of land, perhaps a handful of tools, a couple of animals, and a house you built with your own hands, slightly askew, but filled with the echoes of your life. Yet none of it truly belonged to you. Everything was the domain of the Lord, not some distant king or mythical figure, but your local landholder. He resided up the hill in a house slightly less crooked, with meals slightly more lavish, and a roof that might not leak as much. This Lord owned the land, and in owning the land, he owned everything upon it, including, in a sense, you. You were what they called a villain, not a term of derision, but a classification. You toiled on the land but did not possess it. You were tethered to it, unable to leave without permission, unable to pass it on freely. Your dues were labor goods and respect. You were not enslaved yet. Your freedom was a tethered bird allowed to flutter, but never to fly away. Yet freedom was a concept you could scarcely grasp, for your existence was not woven with threads of liberty, but rather with the heavy chains of duty. Your rapport with the Lord was not one of dialogue, but of decree. You didn't converse with him directly. Instead, your words were for the steward, the meticulous overseer of the Lord's estate, the keeper of accounts where every soul's debt was meticulously recorded. And your debt, oh, how it loomed large. Let's begin with the labor you were bound to provide. A few days each week, perhaps more, when the harvest moon shone, you were summoned to toil not upon your own land, but the Lord's. This was not merely work, it was corvée labor, a tribute of sweat and strength for which you received no coin, no gratitude. Only the silent acknowledgement that somewhere within the manor, someone feasted because of your toil. Taxes, too, were an endless cascade. From a portion of your hard-won grain, to the wool sheared from your sheep, a chicken, or a clutch of eggs here ale, if you brewed it, bacon from your pig, even the fish from the river, which the Lord claimed as his own. The taxes were not confined to sustenance alone. The mill indispensable for grinding your grain was also his, and he set the price you paid for its use. Tempting as it might be to grind by hand, this act was often forbidden, punishable by fines or worse. Why? Because the Lord sought not just his share, but dominion over every aspect of your life. The communal oven was another example. Should you dare to bake at home, the steward's wrath might find you teaching you the hard lesson of compliance. You learned to follow the official path even if it meant longer hours, higher costs, and less sense. And then there were the fees, those incessant tolls on life's milestones. Wish to wed, a fee must be paid. Inherit your father's land, another fee. Desire to, considering a move to another village, first one must seek the Lord's permission, a ritual as old as time itself. And then naturally one must pay a fee. Your livestock taxed, your tools often taxed as well. Even your right to start a family without explicit consent, barely untaxed. What did you receive in return, you might wonder? In theory, the Lord was your shield, your protector. Imagine bandits storming through your fields, or a rival noble laying claim to your land. The Lord had men-at-arms ready to fight. Should famine darken your doorstep, he might with a heavy heart release grain from his stores, though never without a price. And in the case of illegal squabbles, say your neighbor's goat has overstayed its welcome in your garden, the Lord's court would adjudicate, but again, not without a fee. This was feudalism, a tapestry of duties and hierarchy, cloaked in the guise of loyalty and protection. In reality, it was a system of control. Land was the king, and those who possessed it reigned supreme. Those who toiled upon it, they obeyed without question. The manor, often perched on higher ground, stood as a testament to this divide. Constructed from stone or timber, it dwarfed the modest homes of the peasants, its roof so thickly thatched that not even the fiercest wind could breach its sanctity. Inside one would find tapestries, tables laden with food servants bustling, and the Lord himself clad in wool lined with fur, dining on delicacies beyond your wildest dreams, scarcely giving thought to you, the commoner. He might not know your name, but he knew your numbers, how much barley you owed this harvest, how many eggs you had promised, whether your son had grown old enough to contribute his labor. Everything was meticulously recorded. Not by you couldn't read, but by the steward, the reeve, the bailiff men with wax tablets or scraps of parchment, who appeared at your doorstep with questions you had learned to answer with caution. And should you fail to meet your obligations, there were repercussions, of course. Fines, more goods seized, extra days of labor added. Imagine the relentless toil, the sweat, the endless days where your labor seemed to stretch into eternity. In the direst of straits, you could lose everything. Your tools, the very land beneath your feet, your humble abode, your goats, and with them your pride, your sense of self, all snatched away in an instant. Yet you did not fight back. Resistance, it was not rebellion, it was sheer folly. But here lies the peculiar twist: the system, as brutal as it was, functioned. Not due to its fairness, but its unwavering stability. There were rules harsh and unyielding, yet predictable. You knew your obligations, knew what was demanded of you. There was no room for surprises, only the relentless, grinding pace of give, give, give. And then on rare occasions, a glimmer of reciprocity from the Lord. A feast day with communal food, a holiday where the labor was set aside, or perhaps a fleeting kind word from atop a horse. Not enough to tip the scales, but just enough to prevent total collapse. The bond between you and your Lord was never one of camaraderie, yet it endured. Your Lord might be young or old kind, or cruel near or far, but he always stood above you. You bowed as he passed, doffed your cap, spoke with the deference, expected not because he earned it, but to avoid strife. And perhaps deep within you harbored a faint hope that one day you might be acknowledged, perhaps even elevated just a tad. This hope, however, faint, was the lifeblood of the system. Not just fear, but the whisper of possibility that if you toiled hard enough, complied long enough, prayed fervently enough, something might shift. Meanwhile, life continued its relentless march, the steward patrolling the reeve, recording the mill, ceaselessly grinding, and you with your hands in the soil, year in, year out, season upon season. There was no retirement, no bonuses, no upward trajectory, only the silent assurance that you had played your part. You had fulfilled what was expected, you had endured. As the days crept by under the heavy yoke of another's title, you endured your existence, a silent prayer for the Lord's favor, for without it, life itself hung by a fragile thread. Long before the Black Death carved its grim path across Europe, medieval peasants were no strangers to the specter of sickness. Not merely the transient ailments that ebbed and flowed with the seasons, but the relentless, insidious presence of something always lurking ready to disrupt the delicate balance of life. Infection, fever, the wasting away of the body, the swelling of limbs, the relentless coughing. These were not mere events, but constants woven into the fabric of daily existence. One did not require a sweeping catastrophe to be brought low. A mere scratch, a solitary flea, or a deceivingly clear sip of water could spell disaster. Unlike the predictable patterns of weather or the inevitable grip of taxes, illness danced to its own capricious tune. It arrived unheralded, its departure anything but serene. In those times, true hospitals were a myth, a distant dream. If fortune smiled, your village might boast a wise woman, a guardian of ancient knowledge, versed in the alchemy of herbs. Perhaps a midwife skilled in the art of healing as much as birthing. In rarer cases, a monk with his scrolls of learning might offer solace, his remedies slightly more reliable than mere hope. But mostly when illness struck, your home became your sanctuary or your prison. You would lie in your bed, your body a battleground, sweat soaking through your garments as you prayed for a dawn that might bring recovery. The concept of germs was a whisper in the future. Microscopes were yet to pierce the veil of the unseen. Instead, theories abounded, old, bewildering, and often misleading. Some whispered of miasma, the foul air believed to carry disease through its stench. If a village reeked of rot manure and smoke, it was shunned as a harbinger of illness, though not for the reasons one might think. To ward off this malevolent air, people would fill their clothes with herbs, carry pouches of aromatic plants, their lives a constant battle against an invisible foe. With flowers tucked into their sleeves or vinegar-soaked rags pressed against their faces, people wandered through the streets seeking solace in rituals that were neither pleasant nor particularly effective, yet deeply ingrained in their beliefs. Was it divine retribution, perhaps illness they thought was a consequence of sin, of harboring impure thoughts, committing acts of disobedience, or simply the decay of moral fiber? If your child fell sick, it was a divine test. If your fields withered and your health followed suit, the fault likely lay with you, your neighbors, or both. Local lore was rich with explanations. Some believed in the malevolent glare of the evil eye cast by those consumed by envy or wrath. Others pointed to the moon's phases, the whims of animal spirits, or the displeasure of irritable saints. A particularly favored theory was that disease entered through the soles of one's feet. The remedy, boil them, and should that fail, perhaps burn something close, by maybe even your mattress. The cures were as bizarre as the causes. For a fever, one might find themselves under the care of a local man, armed with a blade and a bowl, his confidence far outstripping his medical training. Sometimes leeches were applied or sharp stones used to draw blood. The goal was to balance the humors, blood phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Although no one had ever laid eyes on these humors, they were held responsible for nearly every ailment. Swelling was countered with poultices, smears of mashed herbs, mud, or even bread, wrapped in cloth and tied to the afflicted body part. Some remedies brought relief, most did not, and a few made conditions worse. Yet the crucial aspect was action, any action, to combat the illness. If your stomach ached, you might gnaw on charcoal. If you coughed up blood, a concoction of wine and crushed pearls could be your drink. Should your vision blur, a prayer might be whispered smoke blown over your head. But if your leg turned black, you were likely beyond help. And amidst these desperate measures, there were the plague amulets, small tokens of hope in a time of despair. In those times, people adorned their necks with metal or bone, sometimes etched with words of protection or sanctified by a priest's blessing. Some would enter onions at the corners of their dwellings. Garlic was often suspended above doorways, a silent guardian against unseen threats. One peculiar cure was to fasten a live chicken to the afflicted part, hoping the sickness would leap to the bird. Seldom did it work, but hope was a fragile commodity, and people grasped at any possibility. Illness brought solitude, yet not the kind we envision today. There was no quarantine, no plea for aid. You simply toiled until your strength failed. When that inevitable moment arrived, you would collapse and life around you continued. Children were cared for, livestock tended, and perhaps a bowl of broth would be brought to your side, accompanied by whispers of prayer. Sometimes the sickness would relent, the fever would dissipate, the swelling subside. You'd rise again slowly with a new limp and a profound appreciation for the warmth of soup. But there were times when recovery was not in the stars, and your family would light a candle in vigil. Plague in its broader, more insidious form was not always the catastrophic kind that filled carts with bodies. Often it was a creeping malaise skin, darkening limbs, grotesquely swelling coughs, so deep they seemed to shake the very walls, smallpox, leprosy, dysentery. Even the flu could devastate a village, leaving half its people bedridden. There were no statistics, no graphs, just tales whispered from one hamlet to another. A traveler might mention the cough that ravaged their village last week, or the tragic news that 3 children had perished by the river. You'd listen intently, start boiling more water, tuck herbs under the door, and keep your distance even if no one articulated the reason. Death was not always feared, but its presence was always felt. People knew its signs: the slowing breath, the cooling of the skin, the dulling of the eyes. They recognized its approach and they prepared in their quiet, resigned way. In the tender glow of firelight, whispers of prayers for the dying floated softly through the air, a gentle plea for mercy in a world all too familiar with the ravages of illness. When the Black Death finally descended in the 14th century, its brutality was like nothing seen before. Yet the notion of life's fragility, where one could wake hale and hearty only to succumb by nightfall, was not a new horror. It was merely a more frequent specter. The plague came in relentless waves, each surge more ferocious than the last, with buboes swelling grotesquely in necks, and groins fevers that robbed minds of their clarity and blood that turned dark and frothy. Villages disappeared overnight, their fields left untended as the tolling bells rang out a somber symphony. Some villagers attempted to outrun the sickness, but the plague outpaced their weary steps. Others clung to faith, doubling down on prayers, self-flagellating, vowing to lead virtuous lives if only they might be spared. There were those, too, who lashed out in violence, casting blame on foreigners, sinners, anyone but the invisible, indifferent wind. The church in its solemn duty offered explanations, solace, and final rites, though even its ranks were decimated. Monks perished in droves, priests vanished like morning mist. In some locales, death's ubiquity rendered formal farewells obsolete. Bodies were consigned to mass graves, often nameless, their identities swallowed by the earth. Yet amidst this relentless onslaught, life persisted. People adapted, learning to coexist with sickness as one might with hunger or the biting cold, not with joy, but with a weary resilience. Homes were scrubbed more diligently, herbs were shared like secrets, and new prayers were whispered into the night. Some clung to the belief that surviving one affliction might shield them from the next, while others, devoid of faith, simply rose with the dawn to tend to their chores. Children growing up in this shadow learned which plants were friends and which were foes, how to dress wounds, how to endure fevers, and how to recognize the signs that someone was slipping away. In this world of shadows and light, they navigated the fine line between life and death with a quiet, stoic grace. Had dwindled to embers, casting a warm, flickering glow that whispered tales of the day gone by. And in this dim light, the world seemed to pause, to take a breath, as if the very air was holding its stories close. In the embrace of the night, when the plague seemed a distant echo, life persisted with a quiet defiance. They married, they harvested, they broke bread together, simple acts that carried the weight of survival. Around the hearth, voices would rise and fall, recounting tales of resilience, the great-grandfather who bested a winter fever with nothing but garlic water and sheer willpower, or the neighbor who survived by the grace of a well-timed poultice. These were not merely stories. They were affirmations of life's tenacity, a testament that the plague, while devastating, was not the end. It was merely another chapter in the endless saga of human endurance. Survival in those times was a form of resistance, a silent, stubborn refusal to succumb to despair. It was a declaration that tomorrow would come, and if it did not, your essence would linger in the memories of those you touched. Perhaps in the way your laughter would echo in the halls of memory, or how your secret ingredient rosemary would flavor the broth of generations to come. Nightfall in this medieval hamlet was not a time of peace, but of profound silence, the kind that envelops you like the walls of a cave, where every creak and distant sound becomes magnified, and you become acutely aware of the loudness of your own existence. As the day surrendered to darkness, every task had to be completed swiftly, for once the night claimed its dominion, the world contracted to the immediate vicinity of your hearth. There were no candles to burn freely, wax was too precious. If one had a tallow lamp, it was for dire needs or sacred rites. Most evenings, as the fire's glow faded to mere embers, sleep would approach. But sleep in those times was not the uninterrupted escape we know today. It came in 2 parts: the first sleep, a gentle descent into rest, shortly after nightfall followed by a waking interval, and then the second sleep, a return to the embrace of dreams. This pattern was not a mere happenstance, but an adaptation to the vast dark expanse between dusk and dawn, a natural rhythm to the heartbeat of a world where light was a luxury and darkness a constant companion. As the day would settle into the quiet embrace of night, the world would seem to hold its breath. The animals, once boisterous and lively, would find their peace, their sounds fading into a gentle hush. Children, too, would be lulled into silence, their laughter and cries quieted by the enveloping stillness of the home. This home, perhaps a single room, or maybe two, would stretch out into a tranquil expanse where time itself seemed to pause. Imagine your bed if you were fortunate enough to have one filled with straw or feathers often lumpy and always shared. For those without the ground or woven rushes would suffice softened only by the familiarity of habit. Here under one roof, family relatives and even servants would gather not from a desire for closeness, but from the stark necessity of warmth. On the coldest nights, the animals would join a goat near the door, a dog curled by the hearth, and chickens nestled in a basket. Boundaries blurred in the pursuit of warmth, privacy became a luxury of the rich. Everyone else simply adapted. In this shared space, you'd turn to face the wall stuff, straw in your ears, share blankets, and inhale the very breath of those beside you. And if someone snored, as someone always did, you'd learn to accept it. Initially, sleep would come in short bursts. Then, like the turning of a well-oiled wheel, a natural rhythm would take over, and people would wake. This was not a disturbance, but an anticipated part of the night, a sacred interlude. Around midnight, the world outside was still the air crisp and silent. In this time, some would pray, others would tend to the fire, or step out into the freezing night. Conversations would be in hushed whispers, dreams would be vivid, and the veil between the living and the dead, the sacred and the mundane, felt thinner. Dreams during this interval were not just fleeting images, but profound experiences remembered and discussed the next day with a reverence for their significance. Then as the night deepened, the second sleep would commence, more profound, more healing. This was the sleep that attempted to mend, to restore, to heal the spirit and the body, in a world where sleep was not just rest, but a ritual, a shared journey through the night. Ah, the relief when the aches of the day subsided, when the blisters, once fiery, now soothed by the night's gentle touch. If fortune smiled, the night was a tapestry of peaceful slumber, uninterrupted, serene. But if it didn't, you lay there as still as a stone, waiting for the dawn to offer you a reason to move, to rise. The home it never truly quieted, not completely. The fire whispered its secrets through the crackle of burning wood. The wind sang softly through the thatch. A baby might whimper in the darkness, a cow stir its hooves in restless sleep. Occasionally the night was shattered by the wet, relentless cough, a sound that clung to the air, a reminder of vulnerability. Everyone heard it, yet silence prevailed, a collective understanding of the unspoken fears that lurked in the shadows. The night was not just a time for rest, it was a time of vigilance. The darkness held real perils, both the tangible and the spectral. Wolves, for instance, their howls drawing near enough to the village to send shivers down your spine. They weren't merely tales to frighten children. They were flesh and blood driven by hunger, their presence a chilling reality. And then there were the human threats, thieves, rogues, the fires sparked by a careless ember roofs buckling under the weight of snow, and the inexplicable, the whispered fears of ghosts, spirits, demons, witches. These were not discussed openly, but their existence was acknowledged through silent rituals. Iron by the door to ward off evil, the sign of the cross over the hearth for protection, blessings, murmured over the straw mattress, herbs like rosemary, sage, and rue hung above the entryways. Sometimes a simple string around a child's wrist just in case. Despite these precautions, some held the belief that sleep made one vulnerable, that the soul might wander while the body lay still. So they tucked themselves in with care-covered mirrors to keep spirits at bay, turned their beds toward the fire for warmth and protection, and avoided sleeping with feet toward the door, lest they invite misfortune. The cold, too, was a formidable adversary, seeping through walls, through thatch, through every poorly sealed crack. People didn't merely sleep under blankets. They layered, wrapping themselves in the warmth of their own breath against the relentless chill of the night. Envision a time where the very notion of shedding garments for the comfort of bed would have seemed ludicrous. Instead, you nestled into the warmth of wool fur cloaks and tunics, often keeping your boots on through the night. Oh, the strange intimacy of slumbering side by side with others. There was a peculiar solace in it, yet also a disquiet. Someone would invariably shift their limbs, inadvertently finding yours, or the family dog would stir with unexpected delight. But this was the norm, the fabric of life itself. Silence. It was not anticipated, not desired. Instead, you craved proximity, the closeness of kin, or even in sleep security whispered through the soft sounds of breathing, the twitch of a child, or a grandmother's murmured prayers. In this shared humanity, dreams took on profound meanings. A dream of wheat fields could herald prosperity, while a snake might portend illness and a broken tooth death. You learned to decipher these nocturnal omens, or sought out the village's dream readers, unofficial yet known to all. The church with its own council cautioned against the devil's dreams, urging nightly prayers to guard against temptation and prepare the soul for the possibility that each night might be the last. Indeed, people often went to bed and did not rise again. Illness could claim one in the quiet hours, a fever could rise, a cough deepen, and by dawn someone might be gone, as if spirited away in the night. This uncertainty cast a sacred light upon each morning. As the dawn broke and the rooster heralded the new day, as the hearth was coaxed back to life, it was a testament to survival. You rose slowly, each creak of your joints, a reminder of life's relentless march no matter your youth. The chill nipped at your nose as you wiped your face, scanning the room to count the living. Every morning was a gift, a silent celebration of life amidst the shadows of the night. Every soul was accounted for. Those not stirring were checked upon. Once the living were confirmed, the day unfurled like a flag in the wind. Water was drawn with care, bread lovingly kneaded, and animals tenderly fed. Oh, the dreams you had, if they held significance, were shared. The night's memories didn't vanish. They gently folded into the fabric of the day, softening, yet never erasing. In winter, sleep embraced the village early and lingered long. In summer, it was brief, but the rhythm of life remained unaltered. First sleep, a waking hour, then second sleep. This was a world without clocks, yet steeped in routine. And within this rhythm, despite its discomforts, there was a grounding and undeniable honesty. Comfort was not the aim, endurance was. When you found rest, a fleeting warmth, a tranquil night, or a dream that didn't haunt you with fear, it was a gift unexpected, unasked for. Some years hunger was your companion, manageable with its own set of rules. Stretch the food ration, hope. But famine, oh famine, it shattered these rules. When the fields lay barren, the root cellar empty, when next week offered no promise, food became more concept than sustenance. In the medieval village, you could see it coming like a storm on the horizon. It began in spring with either too much rain or none at all. The barley emerged in patches, beans bloomed only to brown cabbages split prematurely, and wheat heads bowed as if in mourning. You noticed everyone did. At first, no one spoke it aloud, but the looks, those silent, shared acknowledgments, they said everything. Calculations were made in the quiet of one's mind. How much from last year remains? How much seed can we spare? Could we keep anything? How much could we possibly afford to consume? The answers were never reassuring, always laced with a thread of despair. The most challenging decision wasn't in the biting cold of winter, but under the deceptive warmth of summer. Here one faced a heart-wrenching choice: plant the seeds for a future harvest that might never flourish, or grind them into flour for one more comforting meal. As the summer sun beat down, the portions dwindled. The once hearty stew became a watery ghost of its former self. Bread loaves diminished in size, their crust now more a symbol of scarcity than sustenance. The bowls returned not empty, but with less and less to offer. Panic didn't set in, not immediately. You convinced yourself that this hardship was fleeting, that perhaps another village had a surplus, or the manor's stores could bridge the gap. Hope remained, though it was now a frail, flickering candle on a table that held little else. By August, the signs were undeniable. By September, they were overwhelming. The animals were the first to suffer. Chickens ceased their clucking. Goats bleated with a hollow echo. And if you had a dog, its bark turned into a silent, pleading gaze, shadowing your every move as if sensing its impending fate. Bread became a sacred ritual, one loaf meticulously divided among 5, each bite savored in a solemn silence. No one dared mention the crust each crumb collected, with a reverence that spoke volumes of the hunger that gnawed at them. The stew, now little more than colored water, was stretched with weeds and roots, some of which were unknown and potentially dangerous. You didn't sleep through the night not from fear, but because your stomach would not let you forget its emptiness. The children, oh, the children. Their silence was the loudest testament to the gravity of the situation. No longer did they inquire about when the next bread would bake, nor did they plead for honey or beg for stories. They simply sat closer, their small bodies pressed against yours, seeking warmth, seeking comfort, seeking a sign that tomorrow might bring a change. Their quietude was a piercing question. Will we survive this? The villagers, once vibrant, now gathered solemnly around the hearth, their eyes fixed on the flickering flames. They had learned the art of patience, the silence of waiting. The once lively streets lay desolate, the laughter that used to echo through the lanes now replaced by an eerie stillness. No more disputes over livestock, no more bustling activity. Only the occasional cough or the snap of firewood broke the heavy quietude. Famine didn't breed cruelty among them. It fostered a profound silence. Occasionally, a villager would return with a small bounty, a rabbit, a bird, or a clutch of acorns. These, though bitter when chewed, were savored not for their taste, but for the sheer relief they offered. You smiled through the bitterness, not out of pleasure, but out of a poignant sense of survival. Resentment was a luxury you could no longer afford. Sometimes there was grain, sometimes there wasn't. The steward's visits dwindled, which was both a relief and a sorrow. His absence meant no more taking, but also no more giving. His silence spoke volumes louder than any words could. The church did what it could, offering bread after mass aid to the most destitute, yet even they were stretched thin. Prayer became less about faith and more about the comfort of repetition when hands were too weary for work. Some villagers left embarking on uncertain journeys in search of sustenance or divine intervention. Some returned, others did not. Questions about their fates went unasked. You were too exhausted to inquire. The body in famine transforms. You first notice your ribs not from the outside, but from the unsettling sensation they are too close to the skin. Movement, slow bruises form with ease, and you wake with your hands still clenched as if gripping tools you no longer have the strength to wield. The cold pierces deeper, making the fire not just a necessity, but a companion. You spend more time nurturing its warmth than using it for cooking. You sit near it, sleep facing it, feed it even as your own hunger gnaws at you, understanding that in its glow there is life. As your stomach clenches with an emptiness that echoes through your very soul, the warmth of your hearth becomes your last bastion of comfort. By now, every edible morsel has been consumed: the roots, the weeds, the brittle beans, the dust-like flour. You boiled bones until they were nothing but essence-soaked bark, until it surrendered its meager nutrients, and baked bread from famine's recipe that left your tooth chipped and your spirit weary. When the cupboard stood bare, you turned to what was not food, but could perhaps become so under the cruel alchemy of necessity. There was a time you stumbled upon a rat. You didn't scream. Instead, a silent prayer of thanks escaped your lips. You concealed it, cooked it in solitude, and shared with no one. Guilt lingers, but regret does not. Dreams, oh how they've twisted. You dream of feasts where tables groan under the weight of roast meats, fresh bread and flowing wine. You wake your jaw, aching from chewing your own tongue in sleep. Dreams of boiling, endless boiling, even though your pot has remained cold for days. You dream of life returning, of green shoots piercing through the frost of childhood when hunger was a simpler beast. And sometimes you dream of being full. Those are the dreams from which you awaken with tears streaming down your face. The graveyard's expansion was at first a slow, somber affair, but soon it accelerated, becoming a blur of shallow graves and whispered prayers. The church bell's silence was a grim herald of death, a sign that there were not enough hands to toll it. Mourning was a luxury, a silent inward affair, as each soul grappled with their own gnawing hunger. You wanted to grieve to let the sorrow wash over you, but survival demanded restraint, so you bottled up your emotions like everything else. Then, as with all famines, it began to wane, not with a sudden flourish, but with a slow, steady return to life. Rain graced the earth, softening the ground, coaxing seeds to germinate, and plants to stretch skyward, weak yet undeniably alive. With each new sprout, hope kindled in your heart once more, and you saved the first harvest, a testament to resilience and the undying human spirit. As you watched the children eagerly line up, their eyes wide with anticipation, you knew it was their turn first. Elders followed their faces etched with the wisdom of years. You chose the smallest bowl not out of necessity, but from a deep-seated compassion. Passing it along your smile was a silent testament to your sacrifice. When the first loaf emerged from the oven, its crust cracked and inviting its base a rich, dark hue, you paused. Here was the bread of life, the embodiment of countless days you had gone without. Each trick you'd employed, every white lie whispered to shield another's hunger flickered through your mind. You ate slowly, savoring not just the taste, but the profound satisfaction of sufficiency. From your earliest steps, the church had claimed you. It had inscribed your name at baptism, your breath touched by Latin incantations you could never decipher. Your soul was woven into a tapestry far larger than your village, a system that dictated not just your existence, but your essence. You didn't choose this path, it was chosen for you, an inevitable part of your world. In the stillness of dawn before the fire's warmth filled the room, or during those stormy nights when the wind's howl was a mournful song, the church's presence was palpable, as inescapable as gravity itself. It didn't merely coexist with your life, it structured it, judged it, levied. Its dues offered absolution and shaped the narrative of your afterlife. The church was not merely a sanctuary to visit, it was the very atmosphere you breathed, the path under your weary feet, the heartbeat of your year. It was the voice that would one day speak over your resting place, and the whisper that had pondered your fate long before you arrived there. The village priest, often the sole keeper of the written word, was more than a confessor. He was your guide through time, your confidant in despair, the closest you came to an oracle. He carried the secrets of the heavens, the lore of saints, and could explain the mysteries of nature, like why a pig might perish or why the skies darken. He moved through the village, his presence a blend of benediction and admonition, a shepherd of souls draped in the robes of both promise and warning. You approached him with a heart heavy with sin, whispering your transgressions, praying he would not wear the mask of disappointment. How could you not ponder what he knew, this man who had witnessed your life's pivotal moments, birth, marriage, death? The only certainties in a peasant's existence, he was there free from the ordinary. Yet between these moments, he spoke of a deity you feared more than you loved. Love, they said, demanded obedience, a concept that chilled you more than the winter's frost. Latin, the sacred tongue of the Mass, flowed like a mysterious incantation. Standing beside your kin, feet frozen, you absorbed the liturgy words that seemed to belong to another world. The priest raised the bread, and though his words were foreign, you believed, or at least you tried to, that something unseen had transpired. The bread transcended its nature. The wine was no longer mere wine. The whispered words, the solemn gestures, they had the power to stir the divine, to connect the earthly with the celestial. The liturgy enveloped you, its words passing through you like a breeze through an open window. You mouthed along where memory served, crossed yourself in unison with the congregation. The rhythm of sanctity became second nature, a path walked not for understanding, but for necessity. The church dictated the seasons of your life, carving the year into sacred segments. Lent, Advent, Epiphany, All Saints. These were your calendar markers, not March or April. After Easter, or near St. Michael's, was how you measured time. The church's decrees governed not only when you could feast, but also the guilt that should accompany your joy. 40 days of meatless meals before Easter, culminating in a feast so lavish it dizzied the senses. On Fridays, even far from the sea, fish was the only option. Almond milk for the affluent, turnips and cold broth for the rest. On saints' days, you shared what little you had. During fasts, your mind wandered, imagining. When the remedies failed, the comfort of faith was there, a balm for your weary soul. Oh, how you clung to those sacred assurances, those whispered promises of salvation. Imagine, if you will, your life's work, your sweat-soaked labors, distilled into tithes that filled not your coffers, but those of the church. The barns loomed large, their shadows stretching across your fields as if to claim the very earth beneath your feet. Your neighbors, their faces etched with the strain of survival, handed over their last grains, their eyes silently pleading for mercy from a God who seemed to demand more than they could give. And when nature itself conspired against you, when the heavens withheld their blessings or unleashed their wrath, the church's demands remained steadfast. You owed what you owed, a debt that did not diminish with drought or disaster. Yet the church was not merely a collector of dues. It was also a giver of hope, though often in ways that left you questioning. In times of despair, when your cow lay lifeless in the barn, the priest would guide your prayers to saints whose names you barely knew. When illness struck your child, he offered explanations that ranged from divine tests to demonic intrusions, each word a double-edged sword of comfort and confusion. He would give you blessings, sacraments, and sometimes a relic, a sliver of bone, a fragment of tooth, or a ribbon touched by the blood of a martyr long forgotten. You cherished these tokens, holding them close like a lifeline to the divine. Sometimes these relics seemed to perform miracles, other times they were but silent witnesses to your sorrow. But always they were there, tangible reminders of a faith that both supported and suffocated you. How does one reconcile the beauty of faith with the burden of its demands? The church, in its dual role as both sanctuary and overseer, shaped your life in ways that were as complex as they were profound. When hope seemed lost, saints were our solace. Saint Apollonia, the guardian of aching teeth. Saint Isidore, the patron of the plow. Saint Sebastian, our shield against the plague. Their existence was a tapestry of mystery, their graves unknown, their lives a whisper in the wind. All we knew were their names and the miracles they could perform. Their tales, woven from equal parts memory and enchantment, were shared in the dance of firelight by those unsure where history faded into myth. In moments of desperation, their names were our incantations murmured over the hearth or whispered into the earth as we toiled in the fields. We made pacts with them, offering promises of bread, days of fasting, or journeys to distant shrines, if only they might lend their aid this once. And sometimes, oh, sometimes they did, or so it seemed, and that was reason enough to call upon them again. Pilgrimage was not merely a sacred voyage. It was an escape, a brief reprieve from the relentless circle of our daily existence. For a fleeting time, we tread unfamiliar paths, our steps guided by the legends of saints we'd never seen. Our prayers were our companions, carried like burdens on our backs, held tight in our weary hands. We found rest under the stars in the shadowed corners of barns, and woke with feet sore and hearts full. At the shrine before relics or statues, we stood hoping for a transformation, a shift within, and though we might return not healed, we came back changed, or at least weary enough to believe in change. Even death, that inevitable journey, was a ceremony orchestrated by the church. When its shadow loomed, the priest was summoned with his vials of oil and sacred words. He anointed your brow, whispered prayers over your stilling body, attempting to shepherd your soul gently into the beyond. Family encircled you, candles flickered, and perhaps, if strength allowed, the bell tolled. You were laid to rest on hallowed ground beside those who had walked this path before. As the journey continued, a throng of souls converged, their presence palpable along the path. Kakurshiwan, 1901-07. Your family hearts heavy with love and loss lit more candles, their flames dancing in the somber air, while they paid for prayers, yearning for the priest to remember your name amidst his sacred chants. For even in death, debts lingered like shadows. The church whispered that your soul might not ascend directly to heaven's embrace, but could be ensnared in purgatory, a dim corridor between agony and absolution. There, in that uncertain place, you could languish for years, centuries, or an eternity unless someone intervened. 1939. Unless someone prayed with fervor, paid with sincerity, lit enough candles to guide your spirit, or spoke your name enough times to beckon you forth. Thus your family offered what little they had. The impoverished gave bread, the affluent donated land. All these sacrifices were made to hasten your release from a realm unseen yet universally dreaded. Fear indeed was the church's silent companion, a gift bestowed upon its followers. The church elucidated the mysteries of existence when all else was obscured. 420 Churiro 4. It explained the reasons behind the failing rains, the silent slumber of your child, the cruel hand of illness that spared the wicked. It taught that suffering was not in vain, that obedience would be met with divine rewards. Amidst the chaos, the church provided structure, a structure that, while often burdensome, offered peace. Not always comfort, but peace. 120:32. You might have grumbled about the tithe or cursed under your breath when the priest turned a blind eye, yet you never truly questioned the church's authority. Not earnestly, not aloud. You continued to kneel to cross yourself at the peal of the bell, because without the church's framework, the world would dissolve into formlessness. 21:00. and a world without form was a terror too great to contemplate. Even when the priest drank too much, when the bishop's demands seemed insatiable, or when the indulgence seller rolled through town with promises as hollow as his purse was heavy with coins, you remained steadfast. You clung to your beliefs, or perhaps you merely played the part for. In the end, what truly mattered was not the creed you held in your mind, but the actions that spoke from your soul. 1:21:30. The Latin might have eluded your understanding, yet its structure was a fortress. You inhabited the only path forward in a world where every step was measured. And when your time came, you yearned for the peal of bells, the flicker of candles in a sacred space your name whispered with reverence, hoping it would echo enough to leave an imprint. You prayed to the saints, those distant figures of solace, hoping they still bent an ear to your pleas. Shocker 21:55. You hoped that your ledger of sins was balanced by an equal tally of forgiveness, that the church with its solemn grandeur, its ancient dust, and its shimmering gold would bear you through the final threshold. One might wonder, after enduring such relentless trials, famines that gnawed at their bellies, plagues that reaped their kin, and the oppressive weight of taxation and authority, why didn't the peasants rise in revolt more often? 22:27. Wouldn't the cumulative agony of centuries, like a storm's relentless pressure, eventually fracture the very foundations of their existence? Imagine that moment when, with the first thaw of a cold morning, something within them would finally break. Picture them gathering in fields and markets, their tools not for labor, but for uprising, their hearts ablaze with defiance, declaring they would bend no more. But they didn't. 1:22:53. Not often, not for long, and never in unison. There were uprisings, yes, like the Peasants' Revolt in England in 1381, the Jacquerie in France a few decades before. These were like stones tossed into a still pond, sending ripples across Europe. In places where the lords had overreached, where the burdens were too heavy, where the last coin was squeezed from the earth, voices rose in anger. Flickering. 23:21. Occasionally the spark ignited. A tax collector's home might burn, a steward might flee in disgrace, a banner might be raised. But these flames were fleeting, quickly doused, leaving behind only the smoldering embers of what might have been. Imagine, if you will, the gallows standing ominously in the village square, their shadows stretching long under the setting sun. Executions took place here, swift and silent, the air thick with a silence more suffocating than any before. Life, however, did not halt its relentless march. The grain still demanded to be sown, indifferent to the human drama unfolding around it. To grasp why the peasants did not rise up more fiercely against their oppressors, one must shed the notion that they were naive or lacked bravery. Oh, how far from the truth that is. These were survivors not just of isolated calamities, but of a relentless, unyielding hardship that stretched from one year into the next. Their world was one of low ceilings where hope was as scarce and precious as the grain they hoarded. Did they lack courage? Not at all. What they lacked was margin, the space to breathe, to dream, to rebel. When every waking moment is consumed with the pressing need to patch a leaking roof or keep a pot of soup simmering, where does one find the energy for revolt? Could you plan an uprising or dig for potatoes? The reality was stark: you could not do both. The system you see was not upheld by justice, kindness, or efficiency, but by its very antiquity. It had woven itself into the fabric of generations, into the very sinews of daily life. It didn't require explanation, it simply existed. You were born owing labor, owing grain, owing tithes to the church and tribute to the Lord. A silent nod when the reeve passed your door was your unspoken contract. From birth to death, unless fortune smiled upon you, in ways it seldom did, you lived and died within this debt. And yet, by adhering to these ancient bounds, survival was possible, albeit barely. The cost of defiance was steep. The manor had its soldiers, the church its excommunication, and the king, though oblivious to your existence, had laws that bound you tighter than any rope. The punishment for stepping out of line wasn't always death. Sometimes it was worse: banishment, starvation, your family left to bear the burden of your attempted escape. Everyone knew such stories, tales of fathers taken in the night. A mother endured a lashing, a cousin vanished after defiantly withholding his dues. These grim tales were whispered through generations, not to ignite rebellion, but to quell its spark. After all, uprising often seemed an unreachable dream, because those around you were not mere acquaintances. They were your flesh and blood, your neighbors. You shared not just fields, tools, and fences, but also the solemnity of prayers. Even if the steward's presence was detestable, could you not still find yourself entwined in marriage with his daughter? Even if the tithe was a bitter pill, did you not still offer bread at Mass? The village was more than a place, it was a web of life, intricate and unyielding. To tear it apart would be to tear at your very essence. To rise against the manor was, in essence, to rise against the very rhythm of your existence. Oh, how easy it is now, centuries later, to paint the peasant as a figure of eternal submission, head bowed and hat in hand. But this portrayal misses the nuanced tapestry of their lives. Submission here was not synonymous with servitude. It was a form of negotiation. Most peasants did not merely suffer. They adapted, they bartered, they bent the rules to their favor. They found the chinks in the armor of authority, making homes in the shadows of the law. A pig unaccounted for, an extra sack of rye concealed beneath the earth, a bribe paid in the humble currency of eggs rather than coin. These were the quiet rebellions they could afford. They were pragmatic souls, their world not dictated by lofty ideals, but by the stark reality of weather. The pressing question was not about justice, but survival. Will this keep us through the winter? And justice, should it ever grace their lives, was a luxury they scarcely trusted. Lords came and went, priests were replaced, rules evolved, but the wind was a constant, the soil demanded its due, and the cries of hungry children pierced the air. Against such forces you did not revolt, you persevered. The church too played its role, perhaps with a subtler, more pervasive touch than, the sword of suffering, the emblem of endurance. It declared that to suffer was sacred, that to persevere was pure, and that the gentle-hearted would one day inherit the world, though the when remained a mystery. You were schooled in the belief that your trials were not punitive, but a divine refinement of the soul. Your steadfastness, they said, would not be celebrated in this fleeting life, but in the eternal one to come. And if the allure of heaven seemed too distant, the fear of hell was ever present. Fire, anguish, the gnashing of teeth, all poised for the proud, the defiant, those who dared to whisper no. Yet the peasants were far from passive in their plight. Their resistance was a quiet symphony. They whispered tales about the stewards, their voices barely above a breath. They crafted bawdy ballads about the Lord's quirks, finding solace in their shared laughter when the priest tripped over his own words. In the cloak of night, they recounted legends of better times, of nobler men. In their small acts of defiance, they found dignity, a shared piece of bread, a meaningful silence, a field tilled not quite according to the manual. Their rebellion was subtle yet profound, not because they bowed to the system, but because they subtly reshaped it to carve out a space to breathe. Change did come, though often from above. A lord's demise might usher in a kinder successor. A new bishop might erase debts with the stroke of a quill. A fierce storm could remind the mighty of their own vulnerability. But these shifts were gifts from fate, not the fruits of their labor. The peasant's role was to endure, to pass down their meager possessions, and to teach their offspring the art of silence when necessary, and courage when possible. And dreams. Oh, they had dreams aplenty. Perhaps not of revolution, but of a different dawn. You envisioned a time when your child wouldn't shoulder the same burdens, when the knock at the door wouldn't herald another demand. You dreamt of a day when the world would bend towards justice, not just for the chosen few, but for all. The dreams of yesteryears, when your back was strong before the age of 30, and sleep came without the haunting shadows of wolf soldiers or the biting chill of winter. These dreams, they were not just fleeting wishes, but lifelines woven intricately with the harsh threads of reality. They didn't need to materialize into reality. Their mere existence was enough to keep the spark of life burning within. Imagine, if you will, the astonishing resilience of the peasantry. Not in their rare uprisings, but in their quiet, persistent defiance. They safeguarded their culture, their faith, their very essence against the crushing weight of an oppressive system. They sang songs that were never penned, passed down stories from one weary soul to another, and held on to the knowledge of which plants could mend and which could mar. They taught each other the sacred arts of prayer, of bringing life into the world, and of ushering it out with dignity. Their resistance was not in the clashing of swords or the waving of banners, but in their unyielding persistence. When the demands of the manor grew too heavy, they survived nonetheless. When the church levied taxes on their very sins, They still lit candles in hope and faith. When the world seemed to turn its back on them, they drew close, waiting patiently for the warmth of spring. The fields might have borne the names of others, but the soil knew their touch intimately. Revolution did not roar within them as it would in the fiery speeches of radicals or the rallying cries of crowds in later times. Instead, their strength was in their endurance in living through hardship without letting it petrify their spirits. To kneel in prayer was not a sign of weakness, but a testament to their belief in tomorrow, in the possibility of rising again. This too was a profound form of resistance, and thus they endured not for glory or songs in their honor, but in the silent rhythmic dance of the plow, in the soft whisper of the earth beneath their feet. Their legacy was not one of conquest, but of continuity, a quiet rebellion against the tides of time. In the gentle twilight, wispy smoke curls up from quaint cottages, and lullabies are sung softly by the fading embers of fires. These tales passed down through generations are the quiet heartbeat of history, often overlooked or relegated to mere footnotes beneath the grandeur of kings and conquests. Yet it is the peasants who were the very sinew of society. Who would have reaped the harvest, raised the cathedrals, or rallied under the banners of war without them? They shaped our world even as they were denied possession of it. Did they not achieve a revolution in their own quiet, enduring way? Oh, dear viewers, as we draw the curtains on this journey through time, we thank you from the depths of our hearts for joining us. Your engagement brings this narrative to life. We implore you to leave your thoughts in the comments below, to like, share, and if you've not yet, to subscribe to our channel. Together, let us keep the stories alive, for they are our shared heritage. Thank you, and may your days be filled with the warmth of shared tales and the comfort of community.